Hey, this is Chris Nolan, an Emmy Award-winning director and director of the documentary It's VUCA, The Secret to Living in the 21st Century. And I'm also co-founder of the VUCA Max program, The Future of Coaching and Leadership. Today, Dove and I chew on why 75% of the world is afraid of the future and why we need to rebrand the future, and we can. And why your shadow is the key to the power to transforming your future. And how positive VUCA is the key to going from resilience to anti-fragile resilience. So stay tuned. This one's going to rock.
Congratulations. You are tuned into Dove Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dove Barron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dove Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dove Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty. I'm your host, Dove Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your life, in your business, that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovebarron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Now, you have no doubt noticed the world that we live in seems to be increasingly unpredictable. Everything from politics, economics, even entertainment and artificial intelligence is creating a fastest changing world in the history of mankind. Moore's law used to state that computer processing speed doubles every 18 months, and that same law was used as a marker and measurement of the speed at which knowledge and corresponding transformation would be measured. However, it's pretty clear that Moore's law is obsolete. We are living in times where it's very difficult for us to comprehend the speed and significance of change. So if you're feeling it like it's a bit crazy out there, you're absolutely right. In recent times, a Navy SEALs term has become more common as a managerial acronym and that addresses this chaos that we seem to be living in. The term is VUCA, V-U-C-A. It's short for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But what does it mean to you as a leader living in these times? Well, stay tuned because that's what we're going to find out. As always, we need your help in staying relevant. So please do us a favor. Go to wherever you tune into the podcast. It really matters, and we really appreciate it when you do it. Rate, review, subscribe to the show, and you know what? Share it with your friends. It really is important that we don't hoard the information. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's dive into this. Uncertainty abounds. We are living in times where political uncertainty is definitely there. Trusting government and government agencies is definitely there. There's lack of trust in medical, pharmaceutical agencies. Even the world of sports and entertainment is facing just like completely out there levels of questioning about integrity. I mean, think about the World Cup or whatever it might be. All these things that we used to trust are now starting to crumble, and all with them goes a society of feeling like things are stable. How can we cope, even flourish in these times of VUCA? Again, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Well, we need to find that out because for many of us, we're feeling like we might be living in, or at least headed towards, some kind of a dystopian future. I don't believe that, and certainly my guest doesn't believe that. But let's find out together because our guest today is multi-Emmy award-winning director Chris Nolan. He's a creative director, marketing strategist, brand story expert, and author. He brings 25 years of branding, writing, directing, and production experience from both the entertainment and the marketing to content production companies. His company is 90,000 Feet. That's the name of it. And he's worked with and still works with clients such as Disney and Google and Toyota. He recently directed and co-wrote with Mike Schlitz. I'll try that again. He recently directed and co-wrote with Mike Schindler. Wow. He recently directed and co-wrote with Mike Schindler the documentary It's VUCA, The Secret to Living in the 21st Century. Mike and Chris have followed up with a film Mike and Chris have followed up the film with a book and an extensive leadership and executive coaching program called VUCA Max. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the one, the only, Chris Nolan.
Hey, thank you so much, Dov. Very, very kind welcome. I feel like I'm ready to get my Oscar here.
Good lad.
Yes, it was a crazy show last night. Yeah, well, it's a super honor to be here with you. You know, I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Thank
you and
you
I
very much.
are brothers from another mother. You know, when it comes to a lot of this stuff.
We got a lot of common ground. But let's start here. The first question I want to ask you is about meaning. But before I do that, there's a question that's been on my mind since we originally spoke, and I thought, I wonder what it's like to live with the name Chris Nolan when you're in an industry where there is a very famous Christopher Nolan.
Right.
Right. And that crossover must be challenging.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, not only that, I mean, I'm in the Directors Guild and the Writers Guild.
Right.
And so I run into his stuff all the time. I'll have an actor calling me and asking for a part, you know, Forrest Whitaker will call. But it's not that big a deal. We're somewhat in completely different fields. I'm more content. I'm more marketing. It trips up a little bit when I do a documentary, something like that. I'm
sure, because you're a director.
Correct. It's not, you know, I like his work. You know, yeah. I think he's terrific. And sure. And actually, my ex-partner, I had a company called Nolan Lamont. He was mayor of Malibu. We knew him real well. You know, and so we've never met. I'd like to meet him. We should do someday. We should do something together. That would be crazy.
But I just think that you two should be on a podcast together, and so that someone like me can say, "Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Chris Nolan and Christopher Nolan."
Well, I'll give you a little bit more trivia. So yes. So my name is Christopher Nolan. Obviously, too. His dad was in advertising, in marketing.
Oh, yeah?
in London. My dad was in the film business in London.
Okay? Oh my God.
My mom is from Chicago. His mom is from Chicago. So it's just there's weird. It's got to be something cosmic. Maybe it's some interstellar thing here. Exactly. I'm on the other side of the bookcase and he's on one side. I'm not sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really cool. So let's start off where we always like to start off. You know, sure. There's a lot of talk about purpose and meaning, and I really don't think that people grasp the depth of why it matters, and because we don't bother to ask ourselves the question. And so we get very busy, particularly as we've talked about in a VUCA world where everything's changing so fast. We don't slow down enough to say, well, what is it that gives my life meaning? So for you, Chris, what is the origin story of what gives your life meaning?
Well, the origin story of where I am today and why I'm doing, it's interesting. We just brought up my dad. So my dad, like I said, was in the film business in London. It fell apart. He went back to Oxford, got his degree in design engineering, and got into, he actually became a rocket scientist, basically. And
is that all?
Yeah, he was a real smart guy. He helped the space program, all that kind of stuff. But he died when I was 14. And I always felt that he loved the film business. I mean, he actually worked with David Lean, and he loved the British film industry and missed it. And I was very, very successful at a young age in advertising. Very lucky. I got to like 22. I was working at Chiat Day. It was probably the best agency in this country. And yet I quit I just quit. I was like on a complete upward trajectory. I was on big accounts. I was 27 years old because I knew my dad was unhappy. He kind of died unhappy, right? And he had some problems, obviously, alcohol and smoking and working 20 hours a day. And that's, I would say, my origin story, because it left such a big impact in my life to do what you love, to do what you want to do, no matter where you are. Like, I was successful in advertising, working in the corporate world. So I was in the corporate world. I think you have a similar story. You were in the corporate world, but I stepped outside the corporate world to do commercials, to do TV shows, to do movies, to do all that stuff, because that gave my life more happiness, more meaning. And it's been remarkable because I've won a bunch of Emmys and had a fabulous career. Here's another coincidence with Christopher Nolan. My wife is also my executive producer. So it's very, very strange. And I have a lot of my family is in the business too. So that's really my origin story, from a real, real deep purpose.
So when we go back to that, so you're 27 years old, but your dad died when you were 14.
14, right.
Right. So this is now 13 years later. What is that catalyst? Because it's weird that that's 13 years later that you're leaving the corporate world because your dad was unhappy. There seems to be a gap I don't get. Tell me about it.
Well, there's a gap we can't talk about. There's a gap. I know you're right. Very, very astute of you. So something else happened, very personal, at the same time that I don't quite want to get into. Has to do with the relationship that exploded at the same time. So there was a lot of very deep kind of almost like rebirth of the ego kind of things. And then you start to do reflection. You go, well, why? Well, you look at, I'm going to do what I want to do now, right? I went back to film school. I was still working in an agency, went to New York. That's where I met my wife and kind of restarted, kind of rebooted myself.
So you had the death of a relationship,
correct,
which brought on the confrontation of your own ego
and shadow,
and shadow, but it also brought on the shadow of your father's life.
Correct.
Right. So this is why I'm talking about the origin of meaning, because I don't want to leave something out and go, well, we can't talk about that. Bullshit. If we're going to talk about it, then we'll end the podcast.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the person's name. Into the relationship.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about the person's name. That's not relevant. Yeah. But what's relevant is the change for you is this, you're fully immersed. And, listen, I want people to realize that if you are of any age, sort of mid-20s on, that is the first identity crisis is the loss of a significant love. And because it cracks you open to reveal yourself to yourself. It's that first opening of where you go, is this really who I am? Did this end because I'm a dick? Or did this end because I embraced somebody into my life who was so damaging and so unhealthy, or whatever it might be? And it doesn't matter which it is, actually. The point is that it pulls you to look at yourself. And the challenge is that most people don't. They run off and go, oh, let's find the next vagina. Let's find the next penis. Let's go find the next excursion outside of myself, external.
Right.
And it brought you back to you. And it's really interesting because you talked about your dad having challenges, with alcohol and cigarettes and overworking. And so clearly he was a lost man with his own shadow. And you would have gotten reminded of his shadow 13 years later of, oh my God, I'm on the same path of self-destruction.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And and correct about what happens to guys a lot of time is they are responsible.
Yeah.
I was still 22 years old in my head, right? I was still in college and, going out and doing whatever I want to do, and, I was a rocket ship, headed for a mountain, so but I don't think we're always totally responsible, right? But I think that my profession was causing a lot of overwork, was causing me to burn the candle at both ends, and was causing me to have very destructive kind of trajectory.
And that
right?
brings us into our subject, because the subject obviously is VUCA.
Right.
And when we first talked about this, you and I mean, obviously I'm very familiar with that term. You're obviously very familiar with that term. And it's interesting because things that I come at things from a very deeply psychological point of view. And
right.
When we look at what VUCA is, like we've talked about before, is this, those four things of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. But hold on a second. 27, you were personally creating VUCA, right? When we have these moments in our lives, all these things are coming to force, and we try to manage them by distraction. We can't manage anything by distraction, but that's what we try to do. And it's really interesting to me that, you bringing this to the world in a much bigger way. And like I said, Navy SEALs are using it. It's used by the in managerial, but you've made movie about it and a book about it. And it's now having us look at the VUCA of the world so we can maybe see some of the VUCA within us. Is that a fair comment, Chris?
I think it is. Yeah. I think there's two things that have evolved. I think that, yes, we create what was called VUCA. I mean, Nunes and Bennis came up with it. They were leadership experts in the 80s. And they coined this phrase mainly, though, to talk about the increasing technology in the world, and how the increasing technology was causing. I do a little joke sometimes when I do keynotes and things where I talk about the mockumentary "This Is Spinal Tap," and Nigel Tufnell.
Yeah,
he tells the director of the films. He says, "No, these amps go to 11." Right. And he says there's no sound that goes. No, they go to 11. Right. That's what's happened with VUCA. When I was going through my stuff, right, you could call that maybe the way it was. Yes, it's VUCA. It's volatile. It's uncertain. It's complex and ambiguous. But what's added to it now, and it's why we call it VUCA Max, is that it's become massive, the M, accelerating, the A, right, and exponential, the X. That's massive, accelerating exponential change.
Yes.
So the difference is that, and this feeds into some of your stuff that you talk about with executives. So what's happened is we're not evolutionary. We don't have the evolutionary tools to deal with that kind of complexity or uncertainty, right? We're just, it's out of our league. So what I was dealing with was the stuff you would go to therapists for,
sure,
or Jungian and things. I've had exactly, the VUCA brought me to some fabulous therapists. I've had fabulous therapists.
Yeah,
and we will talk about Stutz. Is like one of the thing I put in one of my questions. Yes, so it's VUCA, but VUCA now is not VUCA. It's, you could call that yesterday's VUCA, right?
Right.
I mean, that was 1987, right? Right now,
vastly different.
Right now, yes, it's vastly different. People are you and I chatted about this before, terrified of the future. 3/4 of the world is afraid of the future. There's studies on this. Over 50% of the kids think we're doomed, right? So we've got something going on here that's freaking people out. Now, so what does that do to all the stuff you're talking about, which is your deeper psychological issues, your deeper shadow issues, all that kind of stuff? It basically blows your brain out, because if you don't have, as you do on your show, which I love, by the way, a lot of cognitive literacy, a lot of neuroscience understanding about what is it doing to my prefrontal cortex?
Yes.
What is it doing to my prefrontal cortex? What is it doing to these areas that for 100,000 years we've been able to deal with change? Right? Now, all of a sudden, we're not really able to, which is what our which is what our training course is about. And I think it's a lot of what you do on your podcast, which says, guys, you aren't prepared. You're not prepared, or you're not anticipating what's coming.
Well, as I said, I think it's coping by distraction. And that's one of the things that human beings are very good at. Now you got involved in understanding that actually by being involved in a connection with your military people. I mean, you were part of something called the War Within. Was that your introduction to VUCA and what it actually meant?
Well, I had done a lot of, as you know, I've done, hundreds of commercials and, and all kinds of different things. And I got involved with some pro bono work with veterans years ago, helping veterans coming back from the Iraq War. There was a company that was helping disabled veterans, right? And they had a coffee company. It's a very, very cool thing. And I did a lot of stuff with them. And through them, I met this friend of mine, Mike Schindler, who is with Operation Military Family. And we started on that. The War Within was basically a documentary pre-pandemic, which was about there's a bunch of organizations that help veterans run for office, Republicans and Democrats, and they had a different viewpoint on what it was about. It was about service, and it wasn't about polarization. That was their deal. Very, very cool. But because of the pandemic, we had to put that on hold because couldn't fly around as much. Crews were thought to be, anathema to people. They just didn't want them around, all the masks, all that. But ironically, what happened was, and I'll give you the story of how it happened now. So I was talking to Mike about it, and I said to him, oh man, this is just VUCA, right? And because he's a military guy, I thought he'd get it, right? And he didn't. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know what VUCA was. And I said, what do you mean you don't know what VUCA was? I said, it's a big managerial term, right? So I learned VUCA working with Google on a few projects. I did a thing for UCLA, and they had all the marketing group there. And they all were talking about how VUCA had helped Google go from being a search engine to a multifaceted company, because VUCA is about moonshots. It's about thinking bigger within chaos and within complexity. So they would, they did autonomous cars, and they did X, they did all these very cool things, and bought YouTube. And it was David B. Peterson, who is a very big coach. I think he was called the transformation coach at Google, and everybody was bringing him up. So I learned about VUCA, and there's two sides of VUCA. There's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity on the negative side. And on the positive side, which was from our documentary, there's vision, understanding, clarity, and adaptability. And we have a thing called the VUCA Max line, which is a very big mosaic of how you can monitor where you are, whether you're below the line in negative VUCA or you're above the line in positive VUCA. But anyway, getting back to the story, Mike didn't know about it. He said, well, this is amazing. He looked into it more. And then we found out that, General Casey, who was the Chief of Armed Services, teaches it at Cornell. I said, give him a call. What do you mean? He says, Chief of Armed Services. I go, welcome to the film business, buddy. I said, we reach out. You know how it is. We reach out to people. So he reached out. He said yes. Stephen Kotler said yes. People were just saying yes, 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 mainly because they were probably available because of the pandemic.
Right.
And so Mark Devine, who who was fabulous in the movie. Like you said, Navy SEALs use VUCA. Rick Divany, who is I can't even say what he did as a Navy SEAL. So yes, I learned a lot about VUCA, and not just VUCA. Now, the thing with VUCA that people say, it's word salad. I mean, they have a thing called BANI now, BANI, which is brittle, anxious, nonlinear and incomprehensible. All VUCA stands for really is uncertainty and complexity and chaos and confusion and the anxiety of our time. And the thing that the VUCA Max program does and why it's different than VUCA is great to know about. Oh, okay, I'm anxious, so I'm overwhelmed. I got it, right? What do I do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do I have anti-fragile resilience? How do I change my story? How do I have awareness of where I am in a VUCA situation? How do I have foresight? How do I get to higher peak performance in VUCA? How do I have courage, which is really big for your audience executives now? Courage is huge in the future, because most people, as you know, are running backwards.
So let me put a pause in there, because you just mentioned something that's important. So we're in this VUCA environment,
right?
As you said, 50% of kids are feeling like we're doomed.
Humanity's
75,
doomed.
right? Yeah, humanity is doomed. 75% of people are certainly not exactly positive about the future.
Right.
And when those things are happening, we leave the prefrontal cortex, we go into the amygdala gets hijacked, we're in fear, we can't think big. And one of the things you just said that's important is that in positive VUCA, in the way that you explained it, is having these big moonshots, not one, but multiples.
Right.
That needs context, Chris, because the person listening is going, yeah, that's great. Nice idea, mate. But right now, I'm shitting myself. Like AI is about to do this and I don't know what to do with it. And that's happening with the economy and that's happening with governments around the world. And you're telling me to create these big moonshots.
Right. That's right.
It's like that part of the brain is not accessible for them. Now, of course, I teach them strategies and techniques, but I want people to have a grasp of how do you go from, according to what you guys are doing with VUCA Max, how do you go from being this person who's really living in a potentially dystopian projection to moving into, well, hold on a second, it will be dystopian if I let it be that, but it could also be something else, and let's create these moonshots.
Well, you got to back up a little bit here, because you've got to talk about the evolution of our brains. So the evolution of our brains, as we know, for good reasons, are about 9 times more negative than positive, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're into survival. We want to make sure that we're not lunch, right? Mm-hmm. 100 million years, 2 million years ago, whatever it was. Right. And that's good. It's bad now, okay? Because we have a negativity bias, okay? Yes. So we actually, when the news and the dystopian entertainment feeds into that, we go, and that peaks us up, kind of wakes us up. We also, to your point, we have what's called a linear bias. Okay, a linear bias was that over 100 years ago, our grandparents walked everywhere. Everything they needed was a walk away, right? So they were local and they thought linear. Linear's, let's say something's 30 feet away, right? Saber-toothed tiger's 30 feet away. I know it's 30 feet away to either run or I whatever I need to do. Can I get it or whatever? That's 30 feet. So we have a problem in the exponential world, which is what we live in now. Now, what does exponential mean? So you want to educate your audience here. Exponential is a doubling. So what happened in 2020 that makes it so different now, right? Well, you mentioned Ray Kurzweil, who talked about Moore's Law. So Moore's Law was always doubling every 18 months or so, right? Mm-hmm. Ray Kurzweil did a great exponential curve. It's like a hockey stick. So around about 2020, this theory that he had started to kick in. So in 2020, things started to double. 2022, it was 18 months. It went to 2 to 4 to 8. Now, what's happening now is, as you said in your great intro, things aren't just doubling. Actually, what happened with ChatGPT, it actually quadrupled. Yep. So this doubling that's happening is making this. Imagine a hockey curve, and it goes like that, straight up. So what's happening is we're at the fork in the road. We're at the elbow right now.
Right.
Okay. So what does that mean? What's 30 steps of a doubling? 2, 4, 6, 8, 16. 30 steps takes you to the moon. So that's why things are moving faster than we think. Now, so that means we have an exponential bias. We can't grasp that. And we have a global bias. We can't grasp how something in a nanosecond can ping in onto our phone. We still can't quite grasp it, right? We also have that's why we have a hard time with climate change. We have a hard time grasping all of these spontaneously things happening all over the planet, right? Which is why when the ozone layer was fixed, we got it fixed because we saw one hole over the ozone. We're very visual. So now get back to moonshots. Why are moonshots so important? Well, because in an exponential world, you have to anticipate things more. And the only way to anticipate something like ChatGPT is to have foresight, right? And when you have foresight, that means that you have to have bigger goals. You have to have stretch goals. Why do you need stretch goals? Okay, because stretch goals, and this is, Jim Collins talks about this all the time with big companies. Stretch goals give you 25% more motivation, even on a day. Collier does, even daily. If you have a stretch goal, a big goal, a big passion goal, you talked about the beginning, talking about meaning and purpose. If you have a goal with meaning and purpose, and remember I talked about things that I love, that exponentially accelerates your productivity,
right,
your purpose, and everything. So you can say, I don't have a moonshot goal because I'm kind of limited, right? I live in a scarcity mindset. I live in a lack world. All of those are what's called survival modes. You need to be what we call above the VUCA line in what's called creator mode, creative mode. You create the future that your thoughts empower. So if you're not creating bigger stretch goals for yourself, now, granted, you need what's called, Abraham Maslow called them plus ones. Plus one, plus one, plus one. You need to take the macro goal. I want to do this, right? I see myself this way, I'm sure you deal with this all the time, Dove. How many people are they have this huge dream and they're committed to their doubts, not their dreams. And you need to commit to your dream. And that's your moonshot goal. Because if you do that, if you're in doubt, you're in fear.
Absolutely.
And if you're in fear, you're out of. You could say if you're metaphysical, whatever you want, you're out of the force. You're out of the field. Because if you don't believe in yourself, you do not believe in possibilities, and you have to believe in possibilities, or else you're like those people that are just fearful of the world, which is, whatever we're talking about, Dove, this will get this into the thing I'm working on now, which is why we need to reverse that.
Well, this has been a fascinating first half of the show. We're going to come back in just one click for part 2 of the show, where we're going to talk about why you may need to, you probably got the latest iPhone or the latest whatever it is phone upgrade. Well, maybe you need to upgrade your brain. And what are, we talk about a lot about algorithms. What are the human algorithms? We're going to talk about all those things in part 2 of the show. But before we get to that, Chris, I'd love for you to tell people where they can find out more about you, about VUCA Max, and about all the different ways that they can access you and your wonderful resources.
Sure. Well, we have a website. It's called itsvuca.com. You can also email me at chris@itsvuca.com, or my content company, which is 90,000 feet, be chris@90,000feet.com, which is where we do our long form content for brands, and or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Nolan.
And we'll make sure, of course, that all those links are posted in the show notes. So if you didn't catch them, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just look in the show notes. I promise you they'll be there. And we're going to be back, as I said, in just one click with Chris Nolan. Until then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you may need to upgrade your brain for VUCA Max. We'll be back in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.